Hey everybody, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the ulna. The ulna is the medial bone of our forearm, so it's closer to our body's midline. The radius is right next to it and shares a couple articulations with it. That's the lateral bone of our forearm. When we're talking about our elbow, it includes all three of these bones, but really what we're talking about is the ulna and the humerus. So if you flex or extend your elbow, you're moving this hook-shaped structure called the olecranon and the trochlear notch. You're moving it around the trochlea, or your medial condyle of the humerus. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's hide everything else. So right off the bat, we'll address this really large process here called the olecranon process. And that is located right there. Let's look at another view. A lot of times people refer to the ulna as looking like a drag racer or a pipe wrench because of this structure back here. Anyway, so that is the olecranon process. You'll notice with the ulna, I shouldn't say all, but most of the mass is actually at the proximal end, over on this end, even though the head of the ulna is down here, distal. A lot of the mass of the bone, the bulk of the bone is proximal. So let's go ahead and label the other piece of this little hook structure here, and that's right here. This is called the coronoid process. So this was the olecranon process. This is the coronoid process. The notch that the two of these processes make up is this notch right here, and that is called the trochlear notch, named after its articulation with the trochlea on the humerus. Let's go ahead and look now below that notch, so we're moving distally a little bit. Let's try to get this straightened out there, okay. So we can see there's some roughness below, all in this area, but there's like 3 or 4 different structures right here, so we have to be careful. We're looking for a structure called the ulnar tuberosity. The ulnar tuberosity is an attachment for a pretty large muscle of your arm called brachialis. It's actually the main arm that does elbow flexion. So when we think of our biceps, we typically think of them being strong elbow flexors, and that's why we do bicep curls in the gym. But actually, the biceps muscle is more of a supinator. If you picture yourself opening a doorknob or tightening a screwdriver, that's really the biceps. Brachialis is what does flexion. Biceps does some flexion too, but brachialis is really the primary flexor of our arm, or of our elbow rather. So I'm going to keep adding muscles in. Okay, boom. Let's get rid of the biceps here, which attach to the radius. Get rid of a couple other muscles, the flexor here. Okay, and we can see that insertion of brachialis. This is brachialis. It inserts right on the ulnar tuberosity. That's about where I expected it to be. It's not quite as distinct on these models, so I probably won't quiz you on structures that are right next to each other like the few I'm about to show you, but let me show them to you. Anyway, so here directly below the coronoid process is the ulnar tuberosity. Now let's move laterally around the corner here. We'll hide all these muscles. And they've drawn it in pretty well here. They actually made it a articular facet, so it looks nice. It's right here. It's called the radial notch. That is where the ulna articulates with the head of the radius. So if I were to add back in the radius, oops, let's get rid of muscles again. You can see that the head of the radius sits right in there, in that radial notch, which again is right there. Radial notch. Directly below the radial notch is something called the supinator fossa. There's a muscle called supinator, and you can guess that it's a supinator, and it has an attachment there, supinator fossa. So what makes that kind of tough, remember, is we had just labeled this area here as the ulnar tuberosity. That's correct. This is the supinator fossa. So they're right next to each other, and on the model it's a bit tough. It's tough on real bones too, to tell these two apart. Now there's a structure right in between them which is not super well defined. So just a heads up for quizzes in my class, these structures, ulnar tuberosity and supinator fossa, those are fair game. I'm probably not going to ask about the supinator crest on these models due to it not being very pronounced. But if you find the right angle, you can kind of see there's a bit, you can kind of see it right there. There's a bit of a crest right there. All right, let's move on to the shaft. So if you remember the shaft of the humerus, what we're doing is we're talking about the angles and borders if we were to look at a cross section here. And so because the ulna is the medial bone, oh, you know what would be nice? I'm going to add in this. Let's get rid of all the muscle. I'm not sure why it keeps coming back. Add connective tissue. There we go. So you can see this membrane. Now, this membrane is called the interosseous membrane, and it's a membrane between the ulna and the radius. It has some perforations for arteries and nerves and things. It's a really strong structure, and due to the tension it exerts on your two bones, these bones develop very sharp borders that are on the part of the bone that's facing the other one. So on the ulna, the border that's facing the radius is right here, the lateral border. So its lateral border is going to be very sharp. On the radius, it's this one, and so that bone is facing the ulna. On that side, that's its medial border. So the radius has a sharp medial border, the ulna has a sharp lateral border. So if we were to draw I'm having trouble here getting it quite straight. There we go. If we were to draw a triangle, first of all, if we were to take a cross section like this and then look down at it from a superior view, what we would see is a triangle that looks sort of like that. Okay, this would be the lateral border. So here, this would be the anterior border, which would be here. And then the posterior border we can't see from this view, but we can see this area, which would be the anterior surface. And then the medial border would be right here. So we can't see the posterior surface or the posterior border. So let's flip around really quick and look at the back here. So here is the posterior border. Oops. There is the posterior border. This is the posterior surface right here. Okay, so that's shafts and borders of the ulna. Let's go ahead and look at the distal end. There's not a whole lot to the distal end of the ulna. The head of the ulna is actually distal, so this structure here is called the head of the ulna. There's also a pretty sharp styloid process. You can feel that on the inside of your wrist. If you put your forearm into anatomical position where your palms are facing forward and you feel the medial aspect, you might be able to find a little bump on the inside of your wrist. You also have one laterally on your radius, so you'll be able to find one on either side. But the one on the ulnar side is called the ulnar styloid process. And then lastly, although there's a minimal amount of articulation with the wrist at the ulna, you do have something called the articular surface. And this is for articulation with some of the carpals in your wrist. The articulation is not direct, it's through something called the triangular fibrocartilage complex, but Nevertheless, we call this the articular surface. And that is it for the ulna. I will post this and have a I will post this and have a video on the radius in a few minutes. Thanks, guys.